Yet, nestled in the heart of this forgotten world was an old woman whose life would unknowingly ignite a firestorm that even the Empire could not extinguish. Her name was Mara Hales. To her neighbors, she was a kind-hearted soul who spent her days tending to her garden and sharing wisdom from years that spanned wars and revolutions. Mara's eyes, sharp and perceptive despite her age, often gazed at the sky with a wistfulness that betrayed her inner strength. Though she never spoke of it, her son, Kevin, had risen to the rank of general in the Empire's vast military. She had not seen him in years, the divide between them as vast as the stars. On a brisk morning, Mara was kneeling by her garden when the sky above turned black with the unmistakable silhouette of an Imperial cruiser. The sound of its engines roared like a storm, and soon dropships descended like predators to the surface. Mara stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron as armored soldiers fanned out into the settlement. The villagers gathered in anxious clusters, their whispered fears of rebellion and reprisals growing louder with each passing moment. A tall officer, clad in the stark black uniform of the Empire, stepped forward. His cold gaze swept over the crowd as he spoke. By order of the Galactic Empire, this settlement is to be searched for contraband and evidence of treasonous activity. Cooperation will ensure your safety. Resistance will not be tolerated. The soldiers move with practiced efficiency, ransacking homes and appending lives without a second thought. Mara watched in silence as the chaos unfolded. Her neighbors pleaded and protested, but the soldiers' blaster rifles silenced any objections. When two soldiers approached her modest home, Mara stepped in their path. "This is my home," she said firmly, her voice steady. "There's nothing inside worth your trouble." One of the soldiers sneered. "Step aside, old woman, or we'll make you." Mara's chin lifted, her gaze unyielding. "You'll find nothing of value here, only memories and a lifetime of work. If you destroy it, you'll gain nothing but shame." The officer, noticing the commotion, strode over. His boots crushed the garden underfoot as he stopped in front of Mara. "You dare obstruct an Imperial search?" he asked, his tone laced with disdain. "I dare to stand for what's mine," she replied, her voice calm yet resolute. A tense silence fell over the crowd. The officer's expression darkened, and he drew his sidearm. "Defiance is treason," he declared, raising the weapon. Mara's neighbors gasped, but she did not flinch. Her gaze held the officer's, a quiet strength in her eyes that spoke a defiance unbowed by age or fear. The blaster fired, a searing bolt of light ending her life in an instant. Mara crumpled to the ground, her blood seeping into the soil she had tended with such care. The villagers were too stunned to move. The officer holstered his weapon without a second glance. "Resume the search," he barked, turning away. Unbeknownst to him, a young boy in the crowd activated a small hollow recorder, capturing every moment of the atrocity. The recording would later find its way across the galaxy, carried by resistance networks determined to expose the Empire's brutality. Far away, aboard the Imperial flagship Erebus, General Kevin Hales reviewed a routine report from the Outer Rim. He sat alone in his stark quarters, his sharp features illuminated by the pale glow of a holoscreen. The report detailed minor incidents, skirmishes with rebels, resource requisitions, and a footnote about a raid on Kevinash. The name caught his attention. He tapped the screen, pulling up the report. It was brief and clinical, describing the suppression of a potential uprising and noting the death of an uncooperative colonist. No names were given, but the coordinates listed matched the location of his mother's settlement. Kevin froze. A rush of cold dread swept over him as he replayed the scene in his mind. A faceless officer, a nameless victim. Yet deep down he knew. He rose from his chair, his fists clenched as he paced the room. Memories of his mother flooded his mind. Her laughter, her wisdom, the warmth of her embrace. The last time they had spoken, she had begged him to leave the Empire, to find another path. He had dismissed her concerns, consumed by his ambition and loyalty to a regime he now realized was irredeemable. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he barked. An aide stepped in, saluting sharply. "Sir, we received an intercepted transmission from the Resistance. It's graphic." "Show me," Kevin commanded. The aide hesitated before activating the hollow projector. The grainy recording played, and Kevin watched as the events on Kevinosh unfolded before his eyes. The crowd, the officer, the shot that felled an unarmed woman, his mother. The projection ended, but the image burned in Kevin's mind. His chest heaved with the effort to suppress the storm of emotions threatening to consume him. Anger, guilt, and grief warred within him, each demanding retribution. He dismissed the aide with a curt nod, his voice barely steady. Alone once more, Kevin stared at his reflection in the darkened viewport. The uniform he wore, the insignias that marked his rank, felt like chains. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the console. "This ends now," he muttered, the words a vow. For the first time in years, Kevin Hales allowed himself to grieve. But as the tears fell, so too did the last vestiges of his allegiance to the Empire. They had taken everything from him. Now, he would take everything from them. The seeds of rebellion had been sown, and the galaxy would soon feel the wrath of a son determined to honor his mother's legacy. The silence of Kevin Hales's quarters was broken by the sharp hum of his communicator. The face of Colonel Run Altis appeared on the screen, the older man's expression lined with the weariness of countless battles fought in the Empire's name. Altis had served under Kevin for years, a loyal soldier who had grown increasingly disillusioned with the regime. "General," Altis said, his voice low, "I've reviewed the transmission. Is it true?" The woman, he hesitated, uncharacteristically unsure of how to continue. "She was my mother," Kevin replied, his tone colder than he intended. The admission cut deeper than he expected, the words carrying the weight of a loss he could barely fathom. The Empire killed her, executed her like a criminal for standing her ground. Altis's expression darkened, a mix of anger and sorrow crossing his face. "What do you plan to do, sir?" Kevin didn't answer immediately. He stared at the hollow map of the galaxy displayed before him, its bright pinpoints of light marking Imperial territories. Each star represented countless lives bound by the Empire's iron grip. "I plan to burn it all down," he said finally, his voice steady with resolve. Altis's eyes widened. "You go against the Empire? Do you realize what that means?" "I know exactly what it means," Kevin said, turning to face his old comrade. "But I can't do it alone. I need people I can trust. People who are willing to fight for something greater than themselves." Altis nodded slowly. "There are others like me, officers who've grown tired of following orders that betray our principles. If you give the word, I'll start reaching out to them." "Do it," Kevin said. "Discretion is key. If the Empire suspects even a whisper of rebellion, they'll crush us before we can act." In the days that followed, Kevin moved carefully. He maintained the facade of a loyal general, while secretly orchestrating the foundation of a rebellion. He tapped into old alliances and reached out to factions that had long resisted imperial rule. It wasn't easy. Trust was a rare commodity, especially for a man with his reputation. One such meeting took him to the outer rim of the galaxy, to a derelict station orbiting a dying star. Here, Kevin met Tarson Vex, a former Imperial engineer who had defected after the Empire annihilated his homeworld. Vex was a wiry man with sharp eyes and a mind that moved faster than light. "You've got a lot of nerve coming here," Vex said as he leaned against a rusted bulkhead, his arms crossed. "You're one of them." "I was one of them," Kevin corrected, his voice firm. "The Empire killed my mother. They've taken everything from me. I'm here because I want to stop them, and I need people like you to do it." Vex studied him for a long moment. "And why should I trust you? You've spent years enforcing their will, killing people like me." Kevin's jaw tightened, the accusation striking a nerve. "I made mistakes. I followed orders I shouldn't have. but I'm trying to make it right. If you want revenge for what the Empire did to your home, help me. Together, we can destroy them." The intensity in Kevin's voice gave Vex pause. Finally, the engineer nodded. "All right, General, you've got my skills. But if you're lying to me, I'll make sure you regret it." As the rebellion began to take shape, Kevin sought more allies. He turned to Nira Solin, a cunning alien strategist who had been leading a small resistance group against the Empire for years. Nira was skeptical of Kevin's intentions, but saw the value in his expertise. Their first meeting was tense, with Nira making it clear that she wouldn't blindly follow orders from a former Imperial officer. "I don't take kindly to Imperial dogs, no matter how well they bark," Nira said, her violet eyes narrowing as she faced Kevin. "I don't expect you to follow me blindly," Kevin replied, "but I do expect you to recognize an opportunity when you see one. You've been fighting a losing battle for years. With my resources and knowledge, we can turn the tide." Nira considered his words, her expression unreadable. "You may know their tactics, but you don't know their victims. If we work together, you follow my lead when it comes to the people we're fighting for. Deal." Kevin extended his hand. Deal. With each new ally, Kevin felt the weight of his responsibility grow. He wasn't just leading a rebellion. He was becoming a symbol for those who had lost hope. It was a role he had never sought, but one he couldn't deny. The first strikes against the Empire were small but strategic. Kevin targeted supply lines and communications hubs, disrupting the Empire's ability to maintain control in key regions. The attacks were swift and precise, leaving Imperial forces scrambling to respond. Each victory emboldened the rebellion, drawing more supporters to their cause. Yet, every success came at a cost. Kevin couldn't ignore the lives lost in the process. The soldiers who followed him into battle, the civilians caught in the crossfire. The weight of those sacrifices pressed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the stakes. One night, as the rebellion celebrated a hard-won victory, Kevin stood apart from the others, staring out at the stars. Nira approached him, her sharp features softened by the dim light. "You don't celebrate much, do you?" she asked, her tone teasing but not unkind. Kevin shook his head. "There's nothing to celebrate. Every win is just another step in a war that shouldn't have to be fought." "Wars are never fair," Nira said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "But at least you're fighting for the right reasons now." He looked at her, gratitude flickering in his eyes. "Thanks to people like you. I couldn't do this alone." Nira smirked. "Don't get soft on me, General. The hard part is still ahead." As Kevin watched the stars, he thought of his mother. He could almost hear her voice, urging him to stay strong, to never lose sight of the justice he sought. The rebellion was growing, but so too was the Empire's awareness of the threat they posed. Kevin knew it was only a matter of time before the Empire retaliated. He had taken the first steps toward dismantling their reign, but the road ahead would be long and treacherous. For now, though, the rising storm of rebellion gave him hope. A fragile but burning hope that he clung to with every fiber of his being. The Empire's response came swift and brutal, like the crack of a thunderstorm against an unshielded world. Kevin had anticipated retaliation, but even he underestimated the scale of their wrath. Entire settlements vanished under orbital bombardments, and resistance cells were hunted down with merciless precision. The Empire's message was clear. Rebellion would not be tolerated. Kevin stood in the command center of a hidden base on the barren moon of Drastus, his eyes fixed on the holographic display before him. Reports flooded in from across the sector, each one a grim reminder of the Empire's might. Civilians executed, colonies razed, resources stripped away with mechanical efficiency. His jaw tightened, anger simmering beneath the surface as he read the casualty figures. "They're punishing everyone for our actions," Nira said, her voice sharp with frustration as she paced behind him. "They're trying to break us before we can gain more ground." "They're trying to break me," Kevin replied, his tone low and cold. "They want me to see the consequences of defiance and surrender." He straightened, his fists clenched at his sides. "But I won't. This isn't about me anymore." Nira stopped pacing and studied him for a moment. "It's not enough to hit them where it hurts," she said. "We need to protect the people who are suffering because of us. If we can't give them hope, they'll turn against us too." "She's right," Aldous added, stepping forward. The grizzled colonel had been at Kevin's side since the rebellion's inception, his experience invaluable. "Morale is as important as strategy. We can't let them believe the Empire's invincible." Kevin nodded, his mind already calculating their next move. "Then we strike back," he said. "Not just to hurt them, but to defend those who can't defend themselves. We show the galaxy that the Empire's power isn't absolute." The opportunity came sooner than expected. A desperate transmission reached the rebellion's network from the colony of Calderis, a small mining settlement under siege by Imperial forces. The message was fragmented, but the plea for help was unmistakable. Kevin gathered his advisors in the war room, the holographic map of Calderis flickering in the dim light. "The Empire's using Calderis as an example," he said. "They're targeting civilians, and they'll wipe out the entire colony if we don't intervene." "It's a trap," Vex said, his tone laced with skepticism. The engineer leaned against the edge of the table, his wiry frame tense. "They know we can't resist coming to the colony's aid. They'll be waiting for us." "Maybe," Kevin acknowledged, his gaze unwavering. "But we can't ignore this. If we let them slaughter an entire colony, we'll lose more than just lives. We'll lose the faith of everyone who's looking to us for hope." The room fell silent as his words sank in. Finally, Nira spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Then we go, but we do it smart. Hit them hard and fast, before they have a chance to dig in." The plan was simple yet daring. Kevin would lead a strike force to Calderis, engaging the Imperial troops head-on while a secondary team, led by Nira, evacuated as many civilians as possible. It was a risky maneuver, but it was their best chance to save the colony. The journey to Calderis was tense, the rebels aboard the transport ships steeling themselves for the battle ahead. Kevin moved among them, offering words of encouragement where he could. He recognized the fear in their eyes, the same fear he had seen in his own reflection after his mother's death. As the fleet emerged from hyperspace, the scale of the Imperial assault became clear. Starfighters swarmed like locusts, and troop carriers descended on the surface, their weapons reducing entire districts to rubble. Kevin felt a surge of anger, but forced himself to focus. "All ships, prepare for engagement," he commanded over the comms. "Remember the plan. We fight for the people of Calderis. No one gets left behind." The battle that followed was chaos. Kevin led his forces with precision, his commands cutting through the noise of blaster fire and explosions. His flagship unleashed a devastating barrage on the Imperial fleet, creating an opening for the transports to reach the surface. On the ground, the situation was dire. Imperial troops advanced through the streets, their weapons scorching the air as they pushed toward the colony's heart. Kevin and his team landed in the midst of the chaos, their arrival marked by a flurry of coordinated strikes that forced the enemy into retreat. As Kevin fought, his mind raced. Every decision carried the weight of lives, both those fighting alongside him and those they sought to protect. He moved like a force of nature, his blaster rifle cutting down enemies with ruthless efficiency. But for every victory, the cost grew. Soldiers fell, their cries drowned out by the cacophony of war. Nira's voice crackled over the comms. "We've secured the evacuation point, but it's getting tight down here. We need more time." "Hold your position," Kevin replied, his tone sharp with determination. "We're coming to you." He led his team through the shattered streets, his heart pounding as they pushed closer to the evacuation zone. The sight of civilians huddled together, fear etched into their faces, spurred him forward. These were the people he was fighting for, the people his mother had always believed in. They reached the evacuation point just as Imperial reinforcements arrived. The battle intensified, the rebels struggling to hold the line as civilians boarded the transports. Kevin fought with everything he had, his determination unshaken even as exhaustion set in. Finally, the last transport lifted off, its engines roaring as it escaped into the sky. Kevin gave the order to retreat, his forces withdrawing under heavy fire. As they regrouped aboard the fleet, the cost of their victory became clear. The colony was saved, but at great expense. Lives had been lost, and the weight of those sacrifices pressed heavily on Kevin's shoulders. In the aftermath, he stood alone in the ship's observation deck, staring out at the stars. Nira joined him, her expression somber. "We did what we had to do," she said, her voice soft. Kevin didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with grief. "It's not enough. The Empire won't stop. They'll keep coming, and more people will die. That's why we fight," Nira said, her tone firm. "Because if we don't, no one else will." Kevin nodded, the fire in his eyes reigniting. The battle for Calderas had been a victory, but it was only the beginning. The Empire had struck back with overwhelming force, but the rebellion had endured. As long as they could keep fighting, there was hope. And Kevin would ensure that hope burned brighter than ever. The heart of the Empire lay before them, a sprawling fortress of steel and fire that orbited the massive gas giant Argus Prime. The Imperial Citadel, bristling with weapons and defended by an armada, was both a symbol of the Empire's might and the core of its tyranny. For Kevin Hales, it was also the final target in his campaign to dismantle the regime that had stolen his mother's life and oppressed the galaxy. The rebellion had grown in strength over the months, swelling with soldiers, ships, and resources. Each victory had been hard-won, but now they stood on the precipice of the ultimate confrontation. Failure would mean the end of everything they had fought for, but success promised a chance to break the Empire's grip once and for all. In the war room aboard the flagship Vanguard, Kevin surveyed the holographic projection of the Citadel, its defenses marked with glowing red lines. Around him, his closest advisors, Nira, Vex, and Altiz, watched silently, their faces etched with determination and worry. "This is it," Kevin said, his voice calm but resolute. "The Empire's seat of power. If we can take it, we shatter their ability to command the fleet and control the systems. But we'll only get one shot. Once we engage, they'll throw everything they have at us." "The defenses are formidable," Vex said, pointing to the array of cannons and fighter bays on the projection. "Even with our fleet, we'll be hard-pressed to breach the outer perimeter, let alone land a strike team. Which is why we need to create a diversion," Nira interjected. "Draw their forces away from the Citadel, while the strike team infiltrates. Hit them where they least expect it." Kevin nodded, already forming the plan in his mind. "We'll split our forces. The main fleet will engage their armada, keeping them occupied. Meanwhile, a smaller team will land on the Citadel and disable its shields from within. Once the shields are down, we hit the core with everything we've got." "I assume you're leading the strike team," Nira said, a faint smirk playing at her lips. "Of course," Kevin replied. "I won't ask anyone to take a risk I'm not willing to take myself." As the preparations began, Kevin found himself alone in the observation deck, gazing at the distant stars. His thoughts drifted to his mother, her gentle smile and unwavering courage. She had always believed in him, even when he had lost sight of himself. "This is for you, Mom," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "For everyone who suffered because of them." The fleet emerged from hyperspace like a spear, the black void erupting into chaos as the Empire's forces scrambled to respond. Kevin stood on the bridge, barking orders as the Vanguard led the charge. Rebel ships weaved through a storm of laser fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness as they engaged the enemy. On the Citadel, alarms blared as the Imperial commanders realized the scale of the assault. Kevin's strike team, clad in dark armor to blend with the shadows, launched their assault in the midst of the confusion. Their small transport slipped past the defenses, navigating through a gauntlet of debris and fire before docking at a maintenance hatch. Inside, the corridors of the Citadel were cold and sterile, the walls gleaming under harsh white lights. Kevin moved at the front of the team, his blaster raised as they advanced with precision. Every step was a reminder of what was at stake. Every breath a promise to see the mission through. The first encounter with Imperial forces was swift and brutal. The rebels moved like phantoms, their training and determination giving them an edge over the startled defenders. Kevin led the charge, his movements precise and unrelenting. For every enemy that fell, his resolve grew stronger. As they approached the shield generator, the resistance stiffened. The Empire had realized their objective, and reinforcements poured into the corridors. The clash was fierce, blaster fire lighting up the dim halls as both sides fought with everything they had. Kevin's team pushed forward, but the cost was high. Soldiers fell around him, their sacrifices cutting deep even as he pressed on. He couldn't afford to stop, not now, not when they were so close. Finally, they reached the generator chamber, a massive structure pulsing with energy. Vex immediately got to work, his fingers flying over the control panels as Kevin and the remaining soldiers held off the advancing Imperials. "I need more time," Vex shouted over the din of battle, sweat dripping down his face as he bypassed the generator's security protocols. "We don't have it," Nira yelled back, firing her rifle with unerring accuracy. Kevin didn't respond, his focus on keeping the enemy at bay. Every second felt like an eternity, the weight of the galaxy bearing down on him. Then, with a sudden hiss and flicker of lights, the shield generator powered down. Vex stepped back, a triumphant grin on his face. "It's done. Let's move." The team began their retreat, but the Empire wasn't done with them yet. As they reached the docking bay, a squad of elite Imperial guards blocked their path. Kevin stepped forward, his jaw set. "Go," he said, his voice steady. "I'll hold them off." "Like hell you will," Nira snapped, her eyes blazing. "This isn't up for debate," Kevin said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Get back to the fleet. Finish this." Nira hesitated, her defiance clashing with the understanding in Kevin's gaze. Finally, she nodded, her voice tight. "Don't you dare die on me, Hales." As the team boarded the transport, Kevin turned to face the guards. His blaster was steady, his resolve unshaken. For every memory of his mother, every life lost to the Empire's tyranny, he fought with everything he had. Above the Citadel, the Rebellion's fleet unleashed their full fury. Without the shields, the Citadel was vulnerable, its hull buckling under the relentless assault. Explosions tore through its structure, sending shockwaves rippling through the void. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Nira watched as the Citadel crumbled. Her heart ached for Kevin, but she knew he had made his choice. "For Kevin," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. As the Citadel's remains drifted into the void, the Empire's forces began to retreat. The Rebellion had won a decisive victory, one that would echo across the galaxy. But in the silence that followed, Nira couldn't help but wonder if the cost had been too great. Kevin's sacrifice had saved them, but his absence left a void that no victory could fill. The galaxy was free, but for those who had fought alongside Kevin Hales, the fight was far from over. His legacy, born of loss and forged in fire, would live on in the rebellion he had built, and in the hearts of those who carried his memory into the stars.